If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
All right, welcome back everyone to the show. I've got a great guest today. Her name is Andra Zaharia. And like we always do on this podcast, there's not a lot of fluff on the intro. We just dive into stories. So we're going to do that again today. The first story that Andra is going to tell us about is about the power of community. So Andra, go ahead and take it away.
So Steve, this is one of my favorite stories because it was actually an inflection point in my life. I was working for a tech conference in Bucharest, where I live. It had been kind of a formative event that had constantly nurtured for years the tech community and the startup community there. And it also had a co-working space where obviously there were like 100 plus people working, very bustling, and there was a big energy, big kind of ambition there, and a lot of kindness as well, which was very interesting. And I was part of that, and I got to see that happen every day. And it was a bit like being also involved, but standing on the sidelines too, which was a strange role, but an interesting one nonetheless. I had been working with startups and in tech for quite a few years, but I hadn't really found something that clicked with me. So through the relationships that constantly grew and developed there in that place, I was actually able to form a kind of a friendship with one of the top kind of more mature marketers there, who actually got recruited by a Danish cybersecurity company to start a team in Romania and kind of form a team there, because there's a huge pool of talent, of technical talent there, and they wanted to tap into that. And we kind of shared this common passion and interest for content marketing and for ethical marketing, which at the time didn't really have a name, wasn't really a trend. It was just something that we were both naturally interested in. And one day he sat me down and there was this moment of silence, which sometimes kind of feel like it brings on ominous stuff, but this time it was actually something good. And he told me like, hey, here's the thing. Well, I invited you to lunch today because I wanted to ask if you'd like to join our startup. There were just 3 people in it. I knew that, the risks of getting involved with a startup and what work for one looked like. So it was very interesting for me to consider an industry that felt so foreign and that felt so different from anything else that I'd done. And it still feels a bit exotic to most people today, even if you see it in the news a lot more often. And what was interesting to me at the time is that I discovered very fast, and through his prior experience with this industry, that actually, first of all, cybersecurity was a lot about people, and that was my first contact with it. And I think that really shaped everything that I did and everything I discovered about the space. And it felt like a bit of an intuition for me to say yes at that moment, but I had no idea the role that it would later play in my life, of course, because you only see that in hindsight.
It only makes sense looking backwards, never looking forwards.
Exactly. And I said yes. I was able to stay in the community as well because we were working from that co-working space. So it was a very smooth transition, but a very interesting one at the same time, because I saw that people were really interested in what work looks like for a marketer in the space, in the cybersecurity space. Again, because it feels so abstract and so emotionally detached from things. That's just what I found out is just really a preconception. It's not the reality of things. There are so many good people in that industry. And what that showed me is that you have to find alignment between your values and the role that you take on, the industry that you decide to contribute to. I guess the biggest lesson from this was exactly from this experience was exactly this, that I got to work with a great person, because that's how you usually decide to go for a job, or that's how I usually decide to work with a client or get hired in previous roles. It was for the person. And it showed me that this kind of alignment can really put your professional path and your personal growth path on just an upward slope that's really, really intense and that's very rewarding when you find something that really clicks with your values. And in my case, it was about doing a lot of educational content. It was about creating a brand that's really in service of the people and that stands for values that are a lot more approachable and that are a lot more empathetic towards people, which is not usually the case in cybersecurity. So we got to try our hand at a bunch of things because we had total freedom, which was fantastic. That was an inflection point because I realized that from that moment on, I was a lot more aware about my work and I was able to kind of also help others gain more awareness of how they work and how they want to build their careers forward at a time in your 20s when perhaps other generations weren't as aware as current generations are of their careers. So that was a very interesting experience that seemed smooth at the time, but realized was quite transformative.
Yeah. I've had a couple opportunities earlier in my career to work for a startup, and I didn't take the opportunity to do it. And I think my challenge at the time was this was probably around 2000, right? So this is like the .com era when things were going nuts. And it was so hard for me to determine, like, I knew I wanted all this digital experience, but the startup environment was almost like too nuts for me with like, if you were at a really small company, the culture was really just like, who was the founder or the CEO, where I chose to kind of go the other route where I went for a bigger company that had a digital department. So I'm curious, as you went and made that decision, like, what goes through your mind that first day or two when you've accepted the job? Like, is it thrilling? Is it fearful? Is it both? What went through your mind?
Where do I start? Honestly, that was the first question because we only had a 3-page website. So we had to build everything from the ground up, and there was so much to do. And I feel like this is a key topic that I've seen because I've continued to work with startups or in startups ever since, in the past 10 years. And I've seen that consistently. The ability to prioritize is essential. I know that prioritization is something that we always talk about in management and our personal lives and, throughout our lives in general. But in startups, when you're at the beginning and you need to build everything, you have to decide what to do first, what to focus on, how to repurpose things as much as possible, and how to do this without a budget. And I've always been scrappy. I enjoy this a lot more than having big budgets, which I know may sound strange, but I love organic growth, and that's my space, that's my thing. So the good part about this was that, we were all wondering like, hey, how do we get things done really fast? But at the same time, it was a very supportive environment. And the CMO, who is the one who hired me, was really very trusting and very empowering and very supportive, very kind. It was not the usual startup environment. It was not about a hustle. It was not about just pushing things and pushing for growth. It was about that as well, but with a completely different approach, which I found refreshing and I found different. And it allowed me to explore and experiment with things, whether they were projects, ideas, things about positioning. I was able to kind of dip my toes in all of the areas, and I was constantly involved in the entire information flow, and that was a very maturing experience. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like the smaller the company I've worked for, and even in my own business at 26 characters, I mean, the learning curve is exponential. Where when I've been at really large companies, there's more layers, there's more tiers, there's there's still good experiences. I've given people advice over my career to say, like, I think you got to do both. I think you have to do the smaller company, and then you also have to do the ginormous company. And once you've had both of those experiences, you're really better suited long term in your career because you know how to play both games, and they're very different games. One is a lot of understanding how the machine works and diplomacy, and the other one is more about like strip away all the nonsense, and it's just, if we're not growing and selling, we are dying. And I've always enjoyed both of those worlds. Okay, so thanks for sharing the story about the startup. We're going to jump into another story now, and this one that it's almost always underserved. I think in the B2B world, we get caught up in maybe technology or sales, and we don't take a step back and focus on mentorship and
Mm.
being shown a way or a path. I think sometimes we kind of look at mentorship as it's almost like an inoculation, like, hey, we're going to send you to that seminar that one day, you'll get some insights, you'll feel good, and then go back to work. So tell us your story kind of about the importance of mentorship, specifically around one of the marketers that I've followed over the years and read a ton of his books, which is Seth Godin. So take it away.
It was around a time where a lot of big changes were coming into my life, but I had no idea they were coming, and they were coming all at the same time. It's kind of that moment before the storm where you have no idea what's about to happen and how things are about to escalate, but in a good way this time. The CMO that had hired me for this cybersecurity startup had done one of the first cohorts, was part of one of the first cohorts of the altMBA, Seth Godin's workshop. And he, throughout his entire experience, it's a 10-week long program. So throughout his entire experience, he would share with us, he would sit us down, we would sit for lunch, and he would talk to us about his realizations and how the experience was structured and what kind of people participated and how it made him reflect about the kind of work that he's doing and what he wants to do next, and just the deep kind of very personal connection that he had with work and how that connected to his identity and how that obviously overflowed into his life. So that kind of honesty and vulnerability were wonderful example that I got from this person who was a mentor for me for many years, and it was very impactful. And one day he came to me and said, because he saw that I really enjoy doing educational content. I had proved that through my work. We were getting great results with it. We actually built the brand from the ground up just through educational content and just through organic growth in the first 4 years of the company's existence. So we had a very personal stake in it because we both believed in that, and it was bringing in results as well. So he thought, if this experience was so transformative for me and so important, I think that you would really benefit from it. And I proposed to the CEO that you do the altMBA as well, that the company supports you through it, and then that you will come back and train and kind of coach and just relay your experience to the other people in the company, including the technical team, the sales team that was forming, and so on and so forth. And it felt like a big mission, but I was also very excited because we were both diehard Seth Godin fans. His work had influenced the way that we see marketing, the way that we approach it, the way that we find meaning and reward in it, which is not something that's particularly, let's say, indicative of the profession as people see it from the outside. So to me, it was a great opportunity. I said yes immediately. I knew that it would be, like a project unto itself besides my job, but I was very ready for it. So the three things happened during this experience, during this workshop. First of all, something that I saw become a pattern actually while going through the altMBA is that a lot of people who do it quit their jobs. it's it's probably not something that you'd put in the USP for the course, but a lot of people quit their jobs because it just forces you to sit with some very powerful and deep questions about your work and life that you decide, to kind of not replace anything, but really shake things from the ground up. So my manager decided to quit his job while I was doing the altMBA. He decided to leave for another role and go pursue another opportunity. He decided to entrust me with the leadership of the entire marketing team, which I had done before, but at a smaller scale. I was handling the content team, but not the entire marketing team. Also, it was at a time where the biggest ransomware attack in history had happened, and it put entire factories out of business. It took entire companies offline. It was a big blow. It had never happened before at that scale and with that impact. And obviously, everyone wanted to buy cybersecurity solutions, all of them at the same time, just to avoid, having their entire production line stop. So all of those things kind of merged into one big ball of transformation. And what was interesting about it is that altMBA was such a grounding experience, and it was such a maturing step, that it helped me navigate all of those transformations, all of those changes, including buying my first apartment, which was another personal challenge that happened at the same time, with a lot more, let's say, grace and empathy for myself, for the team, for the CEO, for everyone involved in this. And it somehow, this lens, this approach to work, when you're really close to the people that you're working with, and this is something that I really appreciate about working with smaller teams and being able to be coached and coach people at the same time, and share experiences with peers, because we need these three things. This is something that I learned from experiences, that we need three kind of people in our lives to make good progress. So we need someone to learn from, we need a teacher, we need peers to share our learnings with, and we need mentees so we can teach them what we're learning. And this context at this employer and in this team gave me all of these three roles at the same time, which is why it had such a huge impact for me personally. But then I saw this extended to the team as well, because they started to pursue their own goals and be more actively involved, and everyone came together to help the company in this like huge growth spurt that was influenced by these external events. So I really think that mentorship is such a one of the most powerful relationships in our lives, when it's not forced, when it's natural, when you invest time in it, when you're able to make yourself vulnerable, and it earns you relationships that last for life, and friendships that carry over through jobs and experiences, and it just shapes your path. I've seen that happen time and again, and it's one of the most beautiful things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to circle back to one thing that you said about Seth, is that it had a reputation that like if you take this program, you may quit your job. It's really funny. I saw Seth speak a long time ago. There was maybe 100, 200 people in the audience. And I remember he's usually best in Q&A. Like he always has his prepared content, but Q&A, I feel like you get the best out of Seth. And I remember this exchange between someone who was just talking about like, you know what, my company is not really an innovative company. They tend to kind of play catch up. And even when they play catch up, they don't do a great job of it. So the guy's kind of saying like, how can I change the culture? And he was a marketing role. He was probably like a VP of marketing maybe. And Seth starts to deconstruct the situation. And after a minute or two of asking questions and listening, he looks at the guy and goes, I got to tell you, why are you still working for this company? And it just was like this pause, and everyone was like getting lured into to this question, because he's very good at just kind of saying, you have to know when to leave something. And even if you come here and you look for inspiration, or I can help you look at the world a different way, I can't change a company or the products in that company or the services in the company. And Seth has always been great at he'll tell you something and then you'll be like, of course, that makes perfect sense. But so it's funny that you had that same experience through the reputation of the altMBA, and that it connected back to the story. What was the first time I saw Seth? And it just, most people, most speakers like that, they come from this position of like, oh no, my knowledge will help you fix this. I can solve that problem. And he just kind of goes, nope, you've quickly diagnosed this problem and you need to get out of there quickly. So
yeah, he will inspire exploration and inquiry, and making that a constant reflection process. This is what actually the altMBA is based on. And one of the key, let's say, modules is about sunk costs. So it's wonderful that you mentioned this, because that's one of the things that really helped me internalize sunk cost, and I practiced it in my life, and I saw a huge difference. And I realized how much we don't do that, how much we don't realize the cost of not letting go of something, how much it changes our decision making as marketers, as people, as managers, and so on. And I think it's lovely that things connect. His work is just so clear, there's so much complexity and depth to it, but at the same time, the key themes are always very clear and visible. And I just find that amazing to be able to do both of those things.
Okay, we're going to jump into another story, and I'm going to set this story up by saying that as marketers, we've all had that one piece of content that kind of, for lack of a better words, went viral. I can remember I had done a post on LinkedIn sharing, it was a recap of a conference that I attended. And as I was in the conference, this was kind of earlier on, like before I started doing everything dedicated to content marketing, but I was kind of like, you know what, I'm going to go to this conference and I'm going to take notes in the form of a blog post. And then at the end of the conference, I'm going to publish this post. And I had done it, and it was kind of like real-time news / summary notes of this conference. And maybe 50 salespeople who worked for that company picked it up, they shared it. And there was like 50,000 views on this piece of content. So we've all had that experience of like, wow, this piece of content really had an impact and got a lot of traction. So now is your turn to share the story about a piece of content that you did that was inspired by a simple question.
It's sometimes, first of all, I'm a big fan of questions in general. And I think that this may be the moment where I realize just how important they are if you find the people who really resonate with that topic and who have skin in the game and want to answer it. I was browsing through customer questions one day, and I used to get a lot of emails from people, asking things started based on the educational content I would put out in the form of courses and blog posts and so on. And it was just, we usually got emails that were quite lengthy and, quite complex, but this was a very simple email. And someone asked, okay, I get it. Everyone's, trying to do this, but tell me, is internet security a losing battle? And to me, that was like, wow, there's so many ways to answer this question. And there's just so much input, and it's an evergreen question. It's still true today. It's still, you could ask anyone, and it's still kind of a question that inspires debate, and a constructive one for the most part, depending on which part of the internet you're looking at. So I decided to do an expert roundup about this because I had built relationships with people in the industry that I knew cared about cybersecurity beyond their jobs. It was part of their identity. They had a personal stake in this, and they were really, putting in a lot of time and effort into debating things, finding ways to help others, and finding ways to break through the echo chamber that is cybersecurity. So I started emailing people the simple question, like, we got this question from a customer and I'd like to answer it with your help. And the response was overwhelming. First of all, one of the 30 plus contributors emailed me an essay of that was like 3,000 words in length. And he told me, I know it's too long. I got really excited about the topic. So I will get back to you with a V2, and I will cut this down to something that's, more manageable. And to me, that was very clear proof that I struck a nerve, that it was something that really people cared personally about. So what I ended up creating from their answers was, it's an article that has almost 20,000 words. And even though it's a tiny book, I think that there may be books who are, just less voluminous than that. It was one of the most read articles when I, last saw its performance, and I was able to look up its performance in Google Analytics. It had a time on page like 15 plus minutes. People spent time with that, which again is really an outlier. That doesn't happen really often. And it is a piece of content that I keep going back to, and that is a topic that I keep, debating and going back to. Even, I think it's been 7 years since I published that. And I still go back to it because it's just become such a staple. All those things are evergreen, all of those perspectives and all of that passion. You can feel the emotion that went into that, and the interest and the deep commitment to this topic, and to helping others understand it. So that was honestly one of the things that's one of the projects that's dearest to my heart. And I do believe that expert roundups still have a place in many ways in any industry if you do them right and if you really appeal to people's needs to contribute, to truly contribute.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think one thing I'll share that I can relate to in this story is so many times B2B marketers get into the trap of publishing weekly blog posts, and they say the blog post is going to be, it's a 1,200 word or 2,000 word thing. And Neil Patel, who obviously is like, he needs no introduction. He's super smart in this space. I was reading a post of his where he essentially said, sure, you can post weekly or biweekly, but what you really need to do is put yourself in a position where you create the definitive guide to something and spend, 2 months, 3 months working on one piece. And if it's 20,000 words, that's okay. And throughout that 20,000 word piece, embed videos, like embed other things. And his whole point was, if you create a definitive guide to something, there is so much content that gets consumed, through Google. And, to your point of getting an average duration of 15 minutes, it's crazy. It's unheard of. And I wish more of my clients would embrace that. I think they get comfortable in the, we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket approach. So we're going to create 20 pieces of content, in the quarter. So it's great to kind of, there's two things I like about the story. One is like, it starts with the question from a customer. And I think that sometimes as content marketers, we're starved for what do we want to talk about? And that's the first point, is just answer your customers or your clients' problems. Those are great places to start. And then the second part, which I really liked about the story, is just the outpouring. You struck a nerve. I think asking that question is such a great catalyst for something. I've listened to a lot of podcasts by Sean D'Souza, and he's written a book or two too, and he's big on questions. And his whole take on questions is, by asking a question, it slows the brain down, and the brain almost cannot get past it. So for example, I ask you, what's your favorite color? And you, in your mind, you've already answered the question, but there's that tension because, like, I've been asked the question, I haven't shared the answer. Now it's like you can't undo it. And I think whether great questions are in headlines or just thought-provoking pieces to kind of get you started, I love questions. You can't unsee a question.
That's so true. And it makes everything more personal because it makes it yours. It puts some of the responsibility on the person who answers the question. So there's no escaping. You can't really back out of the conversation and then say like, hey, this is not for me. Because once you're in it, you're there. You're part of it.
All right, awesome. Great story. So we're going to go jump into another story right now. And this has to do with brand positioning. So tell us about your positioning story.
This is something that's particularly, well, one of the things that I wanted to mention about what you said and kind of the areas that we've glided through until now is that although I define myself as a content marketer, I think that we're all communication specialists that get to apply what we learn and our, let's say, thirst for discovery and for working with other people in different ways, but it's all the same thing. I don't really believe in these, let's say, labels because they change from time to time. And this is why you wouldn't necessarily go to a content marketer for positioning, but actually I think that content marketers are some of the most connected people and rooted into the reality of an industry, especially if they're really passionate about it. So they're able to articulate this. And this came, for example, for me, my entire trajectory throughout cybersecurity has always been, it had kind of a, let's say, a red thread connecting everything, which was my interest in the people in the industry, whether they were technical specialists or founders or people in other marketing positions or in product roles and so on and so forth. I'm curious about their conversations. I follow them. I've learned, I think that half of my knowledge comes from those conversations that they have in public, which I think is a very generous thing to do. So one of the things that you get to do as you watch and take in these conversations and participate in them is that you get to see patterns. And one of the patterns that I observed was obviously automation, which is something that's hailed as this incredible solution that's going to make all our lives better. But the reality of technology is that you cannot have technology work without people. In general, I mean, you can automate some things, but if there's no human to kind of mind the mechanism and just keep an eye on it, make sure that it works properly, make sure that they do the necessary adjustments, technology does not work by itself. That I think that that's a myth that we just accept and that sometimes the media pushes, which is incorrect. And I see this as I started working with a company in offensive security, which is a deeply technical area of cybersecurity in general. I saw that most of the companies in that space are pushing for automation, and they're just telling you, like, we'll replace your entire team. You won't need, all these external providers. We'll just do everything for you. Just push a button. And anyone who knows something or who is interested or cares enough about the space to look at what the work actually involves will know that that's impossible. That is a superficial claim. That is a claim that's very disconnected from the reality of things, because offensive security is incredibly complex and it covers so many things, from risk management to vulnerability discovery. It's hugely complex, and only the human mind can navigate that complexity in a way that makes sense and that adjusts to each scenario. So, looking at this entire thing, I wanted to bring in, besides the technical proficiency that this client had for their product, I wanted to bring in a human layer, because I saw, and I'm a big advocate of treating people with empathy and bringing technical people's work into the limelight, but not just through benefits and through these big, lofty promises, but also through the incredible wisdom that they bring, because these people are usually multidisciplinarians. They care about a bunch of things. They're driven by ethical purpose, because their skills are like a knife. You can use it for good or bad, but they choose to use it for good. And that has a transformative role in the company, in society, in how society shapes technology and vice versa. So I wanted to bring that into the positioning. And I kind of tested it with a product launch, and I put the emphasis on, automation is not here to replace you. It's here to help you offload some of the things, but we know that no one can replace you and your expertise. And I saw that resonate over and over again. We did user interviews, customer development interviews, which I'm a big believer in. And we saw people go through the website and stop at that particular phrase. And I saw them light up, and I saw them feel seen and feel recognized, and feel that their work matters, because they're usually under high pressure, they're overworked, they never get to feel like the end is in sight, because there's always more to do. So it's a never-ending process. And when I saw that connection point, I knew that this was something that was worth building on. And that's how we made a lot of friends, honestly, in the community. And people who know that there are people behind the screen, behind that company, who really care about them and their work. And that kind of connection, I don't think that you can't fake that. You either care or you don't. But unfortunately, because I think that, well, for circumstances that we all know, internal, external, and so on, there's not a lot of room for this kind of connection in marketing and cybersecurity, because people don't make room for it and don't prioritize it. And I think that that is one of the biggest, let's say, that's one of the biggest pitfalls and one of the biggest missed opportunities in the space. And I hope that this changes. And there are a couple of marketers doing a good job in this space, and I hope to see more of them.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, it's interesting. I like how you said, most content marketers, they don't play in the positioning worlds, but it's fun to see how framing of a certain thing helps make or break how people engage on it or not. And I think it's a great insight that while the rest of the automation world is all about the simplicity of pressing a button, the truth that you discovered was essentially just like, this is a tool that can help you. It's not to replace you, and it's not going to do too much. So I really like that. Okay, we're going to jump into the final story. It has to do with relevance. Such a powerful word, relevance. So tell us about relevance as it relates to content marketing.
I think that this can be a touchy topic, and I wish we could talk about it at length in terms of relevance, because I think that there's a lack of it sometimes in the content marketing world. But one of the interesting things about being a content marketer in cybersecurity is that the industry is so technical that you can really exaggerate your way through it. So you can really fabricate things because technical people will see through you immediately. Their bullshit radar is extremely powerful and it's set to the max all the time. And this applies to journalists in the space too, because they're usually fairly technical people. They've developed a lot of expertise as they work in this industry, because you can't really write about things that you don't understand or haven't tried yourself, which I think is one of the beautiful things about being in content marketing and cybersecurity. And one of the things that was this powerful experience is that about this powerful experience was that I created. So we had a lot of cybersecurity alerts in a time where cybersecurity wasn't really part of mainstream conversation. It wasn't part of mainstream media, but this was so big. It was a type of malicious software that infected Android phones, and it was the first time that it was so widespread that it had spread to hundreds of millions of devices in just a few days. So it was huge as news. And the research team and the company that I worked for had discovered this. And I had previously, I had built relationships with journalists in the space, trying to be helpful to them. And this felt like something that was really relevant to talk about. So I prepared a brief. I explained, give them, proof of research, screenshots, everything. Because again, that's the beauty of cybersecurity. You either have the proof or you don't. It's not. It's very pragmatic, and I love that about it. So I talked to a couple of, my media contacts, and I told them about the news, and they picked up on it. They were smaller outlets at the time, small to medium outlets. And when I woke up the next day, that everything had kind of snowballed in the sense that The Verge had picked up that bit of news, PC Mag, the BBC, TechCrunch. So it kind of snowballed and went from, let's say, the mainstream conversation, it just in the cybersecurity niche. Then it went into the tech world, and then it overflowed into mainstream media, which now happens a lot more frequently. Now cybersecurity is kind of part of the just regular news cycle. But that was very unusual at the time. We were a small company, so it wasn't, like one of the big top 5 tech players in the world. And what we got from this was over 360 media mentions in 7 days, which was something that, again, you cannot replicate. It was a mix of relevance, of being helpful, of giving something that could be proven to your media partners, and just helping them do their job in a way that was, again, truly helpful for their audiences. And I always tell clients that I work with, and my previous employers as well, you can't fabricate this. You can't make this up. You can't force topics into the spotlight. If you have something that's really good, that is really helpful, that really has, just a stake for multiple people, then it's going to feel natural. You're going to naturally be able to become part of the news cycle. If not, you're just going to struggle, like carrying a big boulder up a hill.
Nice. All right. I like that story. We have wrapped up the storytelling part of the podcast, and now we're going to dive in to just get to know a little bit about you. And I've been holding back the questions on cybersecurity for this section because they're always so interesting. I have a client who is in the cybersecurity space, and I'm fascinated by that world. The things that I learn in that world amaze me sometimes. And it's not even the things that like make the media. It's the things that did not make the media because things were implemented. And it's almost like diffusing of all these bombs every day. And no one will really know about it unless, it's a client thing. So my first question is, and with of course, we don't do brand names or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe share one or two stories around what's the craziest thing you've seen in the cyberspace, where if it was an attack, if it was against a brand or a certain government. What's a story that just stands out where you're like, I can't believe that happened?
Uh, Unfortunately, there is a lot to choose from. The pool of examples has become really large in terms of complexity, in terms of geopolitical implications, in terms of threatening the stability of the world. And these are not. We used to read about these things in sci-fi books and see them on sci-fi TV shows. But I guess that the one of the most important story that's kind of shaped the world of cybersecurity in general is Stuxnet, which is a type of malware that was designed to infiltrate the Iran's nuclear program, and it basically damaged the coolers in their in a plant where they enriched uranium. And first of all, it is an entire feat to get malicious software in a nuclear plant that is designed to be completely off the grid and completely offline and disconnected for obvious reasons. Second of all, the geopolitical implications were absolutely massive. This was kind of a turning point in the industry because it became about cyber warfare. It reconnected cybersecurity to its roots, which are military, of course, because that's how cybersecurity came to be. But it also showed the extremely damaging potential that it has at a huge scale. And one of the other things that happened in the industry that was a bit more difficult for outsiders to understand was that at some point, a group of malicious hackers leaked onto the internet hacking tools that were used by the US government. And basically, they were free to use by anyone. And that opened up tons of vulnerabilities and security issues in software that's used by companies across the world to malicious exploitation, which again is we're talking about really high stakes things because there are types of software that are really widespread that companies depend on. Like, I can't imagine how the financial world would exist without Excel, for example. And this, again, it's not an overstatement. In 30 plus years it became the backbone of the financial system, and so many others that support it. And I think that we've gotten so used to all of these layers, and we believe that technology is inherently safe to use, which sometimes is, but we've taken a lot of responsibility away from people. And now we're trying to get them to be interested again in assuming, kind of taking on a bit of that responsibility. And big cybersecurity events, let's call them, such as this, really show the real world impact. Because again, there's one of the biggest challenges in being a communicator in the cybersecurity industry is that you have to get people to connect emotionally to the potential consequences. And getting people to act proactively, we know, is not that easy. Medicine has been trying to do it for so many years, and to some extent it has succeeded, but not as much as we'd like to. And cybersecurity is the same, it just the use case is completely different. So I think that, yep, these examples can be powerful to show what the real life consequences of these things are, and get us to take things seriously and not just see it as something that's very separated from us, that's very removed from our lives. It is not. We wouldn't be able to function without it.
All right, I'm going to ask. This next question has more of a marketing kind of origin story. So, when was it that you kind of first said, you know what, marketing's my thing. I love it. That's my career. When did you discover that?
Actually, I have a background. So I graduated from the university where I studied PR and communication. I didn't study marketing in the university. Well, we studied some marketing concepts, but it was mostly PR and communication. And I just naturally went on to work with a local entrepreneur who was already kind of doing digital campaigns. And this was in 2009. So that was really at the beginning, in a very kind of the innocent stage of Facebook and other social media platforms, it was a different time. It was a completely different time. And I got to work on that specifically because I had created a personal blog and I had started to become, an active member of the local online community, which was again budding and very new. And I didn't, the choice was kind of, let's say, natural, and it evolved in time. I was fascinated by the intersections of people and technology and how we influence each other in terms of behavior, in terms of how we see the world, and how that affects our entire decision making. And I wanted to be able to work with that, and I wanted to be able to do something good with that because I was so passionate about technology that I spent more time understanding it than others. This is kind of let's say, a learning cycle that I kept feeding and repeating, and that now I apply in cybersecurity. And it hasn't changed much except for the, let's say, the type of concepts that I deal with and the audiences that I connect to.
Here's my next thought. I always like to kind of be reflective when I talk to all these marketers on the podcast. What is it that you can look back on now where you maybe in your first year that you were doing marketing, you thought, this is it, this is the best way to do it, I've got all this confidence. But now, years forward, you go, oh my God, I was so off. That was not the right path to be down. What comes to your mind?
For me, it was quite the opposite experience. I was not confident. I was the opposite of confident for the longest time. So it was really a struggle for me to not feel like an imposter all the time when working with companies with technical depth, with technical people who always seem to be, more rooted into their specific, let's say, niches and specialties. So one of the things that if I was able to do that, I would probably focus on kind of a mindset aspect and just urge myself to be gentler on myself because I was so hard on myself on my 20s that I burned out 3 times. And that really took a toll on me. I connected my identity so much to my work that I didn't know how to kind of feed my essential human needs for connection and for growth and diversity. I did it all through my work, and that obviously led to burnout and exhaustion and things like that. So I would really focus on being gentler to myself because I knew that I could never end up on the other side of the spectrum where I become really lazy and not interested in and just disinterested in my work. I would just basically
Yep.
just move the toggle a bit to middle ground. And I see this a lot in young people nowadays as well, that I have the opportunity and privilege to mentor. And I try to do the same for them. I try to help them kind of manage their energy and their enthusiasm so it nurtures them and doesn't actually deplete them.
Yeah, interesting. All right. My final question for you is, let's say that there's someone on day one of their marketing career within the cyberspace. What's the advice that you would give to them looking at that, that they have 20, 30 years ahead of them? What would you
Mm.
advise them on?
Try to ask yourself what part of your beliefs about life, about work, about your personal goals align with the kind of work that you want to do. Are you an anxious person that needs to plan ahead and needs to have a lot of structure? How can you use that to make your work easier, to make your work of understanding this industry easier and learning about it? I feel like the people who I saw progress in this industry, and both on the technical side and marketing roles and any roles in general, were the ones who found a personal mission in contributing to cybersecurity, because one of the rewarding things about this industry is that it gives you an opportunity to do that. It gives you an opportunity to do meaningful work that actually makes a difference in the real world. It has a palpable effect on people, even though, like you mentioned, that effect is that nothing happens, that nothing bad happens. But I think that that's one of the most powerful things, because when you find that anchor, when you put some skin in the game, then that learning curve becomes easier. It becomes easier to follow, to connect with people, to follow conversations, to find your information sources, to find your inspiration, to advocate for things with your manager, with your CEO, to make progress, everything becomes easier because you have such a powerful incentive that's part of you. And again, I'm not advocating for making it your entire identity, but it is about finding that personal alignment, because if there's conflict there, if you're trying to will yourself to love it, if you're trying to will yourself to do your job, that's not going to work in the long run. And I've seen great people, I've hired great people who just became disinterested in the industry, although they were doing a good job, but their heart wasn't in it. And I hated to see them, change their minds, but it happens. And the people who have persisted and are determined to, build something and make a dent in the space are the ones who found this very personal goal and whose values really clicked with the ones in the industry.
Yeah. All right. Good advice. Well, Andra, thank you so much for joining us today. I enjoyed your stories. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, should they go to LinkedIn? Should they go to a website? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Thank you, Steve, for allowing me to share these stories and for inspiring such wonderful connections and for looking for those triggers that really make things personal and very kind of intense. Can find me on LinkedIn, can find me on Twitter, and I also have a personal website. It's just myname.com, so andrazaharia.com. But yeah, the easiest way, Twitter, LinkedIn, that's where I hang out. And if you're interested in the cybersecurity industry, I would love to talk to you, especially if you're interested in, communication roles. And I have a great list of people to follow in this space on Twitter, which you can use anytime to see kind of what it looks like, what people are talking about, and what kind of people are on there.
Yep. All right. Awesome. Well, that's all for the show today. Thanks again for joining us, and we will catch you next time. See you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.